By noon, Karen's phone was ringing nonstop. The Willowbrook Estates community Facebook page was exploding with outrage, and somehow, someone had already posted a video of her destroying the pool. The headline read, "How President Goes Nuclear on Family Pool." Karen sat in her immaculate living room, scrolling through the comments with growing horror. Psycho Karen strikes again. Someone needs to stop this woman. Time to recall the HOA president. The doorbell rang. Through her security camera, she could see Bob Henderson standing on her porch, his face flushed with anger. Behind him stood 3 other neighbors, the Johnsons, the Patel family, and Mrs. Chen from the corner house. "Karen!" Bob's voice boomed through the door. "Open up, we need to talk." She considered ignoring them, but that would only make things worse. Karen smoothed her blouse, checked her reflection in the hallway mirror, and opened the door with her best professional smile. "Bob, everyone, what can I do for you? You can start by explaining why you destroyed my pool with a sledgehammer." Bob's face was red, veins bulging in his neck. "Have you completely lost your mind?" "I was enforcing community standards," Karen replied evenly. "Perhaps if you responded to my previous communications." Previous communications. Bob pulled out a crumpled paper. "You mean this? Dear Mr. Henderson, your pool is in violation of Section 4.2b. That's not communication, that's harassment." Mr. Patel stepped forward, his voice measured but firm. "Karen, we've been neighbors for 4 years. I've never seen you act like this before. Are you feeling all right?" Something in his genuine concern made Karen's mask slip for just a moment. She thought about her recent divorce, the sleepless nights, the way maintaining control over the HOA had become her only source of stability. But then she remembered their laughter at the last meeting, the way they dismissed her concerns. "I'm fine," she said stiffly. "I'm doing my job." "Your job isn't to destroy people's property," Mrs. Chen interjected. "My grandson loves that pool. You've traumatized that poor boy." Karen's jaw tightened. Children's feelings don't supersede community regulations. "Jesus Christ, Karen." Bob threw his hands up. "Listen to yourself. You sound like a fascist." "I sound like someone who cares about maintaining property values and community standards," Karen shot back. "Unlike the rest of you, who seem perfectly content to let this neighborhood turn into a trailer park." The group exchanged glances. Mr. Johnson, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. "Karen, we're calling an emergency HOA meeting. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m. We're going to discuss your removal as president." Karen felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You can't do that." "We can and we will," Bob said. "You've crossed a line, Karen. This isn't about pool regulations anymore. This is about you being completely out of control." "I am in control," Karen said, her voice rising. "I'm the only one who cares about this neighborhood." "You care about power," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "There's a difference." After they left, Karen stood in her doorway, watching them walk away. Their words echoed in her mind. Fascist, out of control, power-hungry. Is that really how they saw her? She'd given 6 years of her life to this community, sacrificed her own time and energy to keep their property values high. She closed the door and leaned against it, her perfectly composed facade finally cracking. Tomorrow night, they'd try to vote her out. But Karen Whitmore hadn't maintained control of the Willowbrook Estates HOA for 6 years by backing down from a fight. The community center had never been so packed. Karen arrived 15 minutes early, her arms full of binders and printed documents. She'd spent the night preparing her defense, compiling every violation, every ignored regulation, every instance of the very people who now wanted her removed failing to follow the rules they claimed to care about. The room buzzed with conversation that died as she entered. 43 residents had shown up, a record for any HOA meeting. Karen took her usual spot at the front table, arranging her materials with deliberate precision. Bob Henderson sat in the front row, his wife beside him. Their eyes followed her every movement, and Karen could see the mix of anger and concern in their expressions. Behind them, the neighbors she tried so hard to protect whispered among themselves. "Let's get started," Karen said, calling the meeting to order. "I understand there's been some discussion about my leadership." "Discussion?" Bob stood up. Karen, you destroyed my pool with a sledgehammer. That's not leadership, that's destruction of property. I enforce community standards, Karen replied, opening her first binder. Standards that you, Bob, have violated 17 times in the past 3 years. She began reading from her list, her voice steady and professional. Mailbox positioned 3 inches too far from the curb. Grass height exceeding regulation standards on 4 separate occasions. Garden gnome collection exceeding the 2 decoration limit. Are you kidding me right now? Sarah Henderson's voice cracked. You're listing mailbox violations while justifying destroying our pool. I'm demonstrating that the very people calling for my removal have consistently failed to follow the rules they now claim to care about, Karen said. Mr. Patel stood up. Karen, this isn't about violations. This is about you losing perspective. You've turned neighbor against neighbor, created fear in our community. I've maintained property values, Karen shot back. I've kept this neighborhood from becoming a free-for-all. At what cost? Mrs. Chen asked quietly. My grandson Tommy is afraid to play in his own backyard now. He keeps asking why the mean lady broke his pool. Karen felt something crack inside her chest. She remembered Tommy's innocent face that morning, his bowl of cereal, his simple question about swimming. She'd been so focused on the principle, on maintaining control, that she'd forgotten about the 7-year-old boy who just wanted to splash around on a hot day. Karen's voice faltered. I was protecting the community. From what? Bob's voice was gentler now. From a kid having fun in his backyard? The room fell silent. Karen looked around at the faces of her neighbors, people she'd known for years, people whose property values she'd protected, whose community she tried to preserve. They weren't looking at her with hatred, she realized. They were looking at her with pity. I gave 6 years of my life to this neighborhood, Karen said quietly. I sacrificed my free time, my energy, my marriage. Your marriage. Sarah's voice was soft. Karen, we didn't know you and Richard were having problems. He said I cared more about other people's lawns than our own relationship. Karen's voice cracked. He said I'd become someone he didn't recognize. The room was completely silent now. Karen felt the weight of 6 years of rigid control, of turning her neighbors into adversaries, of losing herself in the pursuit of perfect order. I was trying to maintain standards, she whispered. I was trying to keep everything from falling apart. But it did fall apart anyway, Detective Rodriguez said from the back of the room. Karen hadn't noticed her come in. Mrs. Whitmore, I've spoken with several residents. They're not pressing charges, but they are concerned about your well-being. Karen looked down at her binders full of violations, her carefully compiled evidence of everyone else's failures. She'd been so focused on everyone else's mistakes that she'd missed the biggest violation of all, her own humanity. I'll resign, she said quietly. Effective immediately. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Bob Henderson stood up. Karen, we don't want to destroy you. We just want our neighborhood back. I know, Karen said, tears finally breaking through her composure. I want it back too. As the meeting dissolved into smaller conversations, Karen sat alone at the front table, her resignation letter written in shaky handwriting. She'd lost control of everything she tried so hard to protect. But maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found something she'd been missing all along. The possibility of redemption. Outside, she could hear children playing in the distance, their laughter echoing through the evening air. For the first time in months, Karen smiled. Tomorrow, she'd start figuring out who she was beyond the HOA president. Tonight, she'd call Richard and apologize. But as she gathered her things, Karen noticed something troubling in the parking lot. The Sullivans' car was parked slightly over the line, and Mrs. Garcia's trash can was 3 feet from the approved collection zone. Old habits, she realized, died hard. Very hard indeed. The sledgehammer felt surprisingly light in Karen Whitmore's perfectly manicured hands as she stood at the edge of the Hendersons' backyard, staring at their inflatable pool. The pink flamingo float bobbed mockingly in the chlorinated water, as if taunting her authority as Homeowners Association president. 27 violations, she muttered through gritted teeth, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. 27 times I've told them about the pool regulations. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine suburban landscape of Willowbrook Estates, where Karen had ruled with an iron fist for 6 years. Every blade of grass was regulation height. Every mailbox painted the approved shade of forest green. Every garden gnome strategically positioned within HOA guidelines. Except for this monstrosity. The pool wasn't even that large, maybe 12 feet across, but it sat there like a blue carbuncle on the otherwise perfect neighborhood. Worse, it was visible from the street, a clear violation of Section 4.2b of the community guidelines she'd spent months crafting. "Mrs. Whitmore?" came a tentative voice from behind her. "Is everything okay?" Karen spun around, her silver hair whipping dramatically in the breeze. Young Tommy Henderson, all of 7 years old, stood in his pajamas with a bowl of cereal, watching her with curious eyes. "Where are your parents, Tommy?" Karen's voice cracked slightly, though she tried to maintain her composure. "Dad's at work. Mom's in the shower. Are you gonna swim in our pool?" Tommy asked innocently, spooning Cheerios into his mouth. Karen's eye twitched. The pool had been up for 3 weeks now. 3 weeks of phone calls, emails, and formal notices that the Henderson family had blatantly ignored. Yesterday's community meeting had been the final straw when Bob Henderson had actually laughed at her concerns about property values and neighborhood aesthetics. "I'm going to fix this situation," Karen said, her voice steadying as she gripped the sledgehammer tighter. Once and for all, she tried everything else. The strongly worded letters, the fines, the threats of legal action. But the Hendersons had pushed her too far. They challenged her authority in front of the entire neighborhood, questioned her dedication to maintaining their community standards. They'd forgotten who kept their property values high, who organized the block parties, who made sure Willowbrook Estates remained the envy of the entire county. "Mom says you're the pool police," Tommy said matter-of-factly, crunching his cereal. Karen's face flushed red. Pool police. That's what they called her behind her back, wasn't it? As if maintaining community standards was some kind of joke. As if she didn't sacrifice her own free time to keep their little paradise intact. "Your mother," Karen said slowly, "is about to learn exactly what happens when people don't follow the rules." The first swing sent a satisfying crack through the pool's vinyl liner. Water began to gush out in a steady stream, flooding the Hendersons' carefully maintained lawn. Karen felt a surge of vindication as she raised the sledgehammer again, her sensible flats squelching in the growing puddle. "This is for ignoring my notices," she grunted, bringing the hammer down again. "Crack. This is for laughing at me in front of the entire neighborhood. Crack. And this," she said, her voice rising to a near shriek, "is for calling me the pool police." The inflatable pool was surprisingly resilient, but Karen's fury was stronger. Years of pent-up frustration poured out with each swing. Every time someone had questioned her authority, every eye roll during HOA meetings, every whispered complaint about her excessive attention to detail, it all came flooding out. "Holy shit," came a voice from the Hendersons' sliding door. Sarah Henderson stood there in her bathrobe, hair dripping wet, coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips. Karen paused mid-swing, breathing heavily. "Sarah, good morning." "Karen, what the hell are you doing to my pool?" "I'm enforcing HOA regulations," Karen replied matter-of-factly, as if destroying someone's property was the most natural thing in the world. Section 4.2b clearly states that temporary pools cannot be visible from the street without proper permits. Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "So you decided to demolish it?" "I tried the proper channels. You ignored them." Karen hefted the sledgehammer again. "Sometimes direct action is necessary. That cost us $300. And your potential HOA fines would have been much more." Karen's voice was maddeningly calm now, as if she'd found some zen-like state through destruction. "Really, I'm saving you money." Sarah's face turned an alarming shade of purple. "You're insane. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Karen said, examining the mangled remains of the pool. "I'm the HOA president, acting within my authority to maintain community standards. Besides, Bob should have thought of that before he publicly humiliated me. Publicly humiliated you? Sarah's voice cracked. He just asked why we needed a permit for a kiddie pool. He questioned my authority in front of 17 neighbors. Karen snapped, her composure finally cracking. He made me look like some kind of tyrant. You are a tyrant. Sarah shouted back, you're completely unhinged. Karen's grip tightened on the sledgehammer handle. The pink flamingo float lay deflated in the ruins, its cheerful smile now seeming sinister. Something dark flickered in Karen's eyes, a look that made Sarah take an involuntary step backward. I maintain order, Karen said quietly. I keep property values high. I make sure this neighborhood remains respectable. If that makes me a tyrant, then so be it. She turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Sarah? You have until tomorrow to clean up this mess. Standing water is a health hazard. Karen spent the evening in her home office, surrounded by HOA documents, community bylaws, and her laptop glowing with research. If they wanted to play hardball, she'd give them hardball. She'd been meticulous in her record-keeping for 6 years, and she knew exactly where every skeleton was buried. Let's see, she muttered, pulling up her violation database. The Johnsons, fence height violation from 2022, never properly corrected. The Patels, unapproved garden modification last spring. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she compiled a comprehensive list. Bob Henderson alone had 17 minor violations dating back 3 years. Mailbox positioning, grass height, a gnome that exceeded the 2 decoration limit. She let most of them slide because they were neighbors, because she tried to be reasonable. Reasonable, she scoffed. And look where that got me. A knock at her door interrupted her work. Through the peephole, she saw a woman in a business suit, someone she didn't recognize from the neighborhood. Mrs. Whitmore? I'm Detective Lisa Rodriguez with the County Sheriff's Office. I'd like to ask you a few questions about the incident this morning. Karen's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. Of course, please come in. Detective Rodriguez was younger than Karen had expected, maybe mid-30s, with kind eyes that seemed to see everything. She sat in Karen's pristine living room, notepad in hand. So you admit to destroying the Hendersons' pool? Rodriguez asked. I was enforcing HOA regulations. The pool was in clear violation of community guidelines. Karen had rehearsed this response all afternoon. With a sledgehammer. I used the tools available to me. Rodriguez studied her for a long moment. Mrs. Whitmore, I have to ask, is everything okay at home? This seems like an extreme response to a neighborhood dispute. Karen's carefully constructed composure wavered. I'm fine. I'm doing my job. Your job involves property destruction. My job involves maintaining community standards, Karen snapped. The Hendersons had multiple opportunities to address the violation. They chose to ignore them. So you took matters into your own hands. I took appropriate action to resolve a compliance issue. Rodriguez made notes, her expression neutral. The Hendersons mentioned you've been increasingly aggressive in your enforcement lately. Other neighbors have filed complaints. Other neighbors. Karen's voice rose. What complaints? Excessive fines, harassment, following residents around the neighborhood to document violations. Mrs. Whitmore, when was the last time you took a vacation? The question caught Karen off guard. That's not relevant. Actually, it is. You've been HOA president for 6 years, correct? That's a volunteer position. When did you last take a break? Karen couldn't remember. The HOA had become her entire life, especially since Richard left. Maintaining order in Willowbrook Estates was the only thing that made sense anymore. The only thing she could control. I don't need a break, she said quietly. Rodriguez leaned forward. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm not here to arrest you. The Hendersons could press charges for property destruction, but they're hoping we can resolve this without involving the courts. They're concerned about you. Concerned about me? Karen's laugh was bitter. They're trying to have me removed from the HOA board tomorrow night. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, Rodriguez said gently. When was the last time you did something just for yourself? When did you last have fun? Karen stared at her, unable to answer. Fun? She'd forgotten what that meant. Her entire identity had become wrapped up in being the neighborhood watchdog, the guardian of property values, the enforcer of rules. "I'll be in touch," Rodriguez said, standing to leave. "In the meantime, maybe consider taking a step back. Let someone else handle HOA business for a while." After the detective left, Karen sat alone in her perfect living room, surrounded by the documentation of 6 years of meticulous rule enforcement. Tomorrow night, they'd try to vote her out, but she still had one card left to play.